The clubby, we're in clubbies for the full 3 years, or like me, for 1. Please accept my, my respect, and just know that in my head, that every day that I do my job, you are the people who sit in the back of my head when I ask myself the question, what would people think? There are a lot of people who've been responsible for getting me to where I am today, and one of them sitting right down here on the end of the table, Christine. But there are others, like 6 sets of foster parents, and then actually my last foster family, and people don't really realise this, but when I was taken out of foster care at the age of 16 and entered regular force cadet schools, a regular force cadet school in the Army became my formal guardian. I was formally signed over into the care of the New Zealand Army. So, you know, when I say that, when we say the Army is our family, for me, it is, because I had to be placed into the formal custody and care of the Army as an underage youth who was a ward of the state. So all of you who had that role and that responsibility of knocking me into shape, I guess I'll call you all Dad, and I hope I'm in your will. And if you have trouble finding where to send a copy of that will, it's 50 Hoaki Road, RD1, Carterton, 5791. I'll give you that again. If you haven't got a pen, I've got about 5. So I guess it's probably this time that I should talk a little bit about my time in cadets. And not too long, because you've all been there, but I guess the first thing that I remember was missing all the school photographs at Tararua College, because I was over in Palmerston North going through my tests. And when you go to my final year at Tararua College in 1970, I'm not in any of the photos for the rugby team or the cross country or the rifle shooting or any of that, because I wasn't there. The reason I wasn't there is because I was in Palmerston North doing my tests and going through my medical. I don't think it actually dawned on me as to how significant that selection process was. What did dawn on me as being quite significant is that guy who held my testicles in his hand. And coming from Paiatua, you know, we looked a little bit strange at men that did that. But, you know, that was one of those little moments as a young lad of 16 I had to struggle with in my head, prevent myself from smacking him right in the face. But I got through that. The other little challenging part was I'd heard the story that you couldn't get in the Army if you had flat feet. So I spent all of that time bare feet in that little in that room, being assessed by that doctor with my toes curled up and feet arched, make it look as though I actually had arches in my feet. And that was the medical phase. Got through that, did the other tests and that. But it wasn't until I actually got to Wairuri, you know, get off that train, onto that platform, freezing bloody cold, and suddenly, Oyster. Is he here on staff? Sir Major Rose? Yelling and screaming. Oh, what's wrong? What's the big panic? Why are you yelling? But, you know, getting through that, getting into the barracks, getting processed through, having thunder and lightning struck me when I saw Reg Herman, Corporal Reg Herman, and said, get it. Where is he, Reg? Yeah, down there. Saw this guy that I knew from Tararua College and said, g'day, Reg, and the whole roof fell in on top of me. And him. And I didn't know I had so many alternate names until that day. But, you know, most of them sort of started with piece of and ended in the word shit, and the sort of other expletives like do you think you are? That is Lance Corporal Herman. That's how it went on for about 3 days, I think, that conversation. And later in that night we finally found I found Reg was going to be my section commander, and we were in the same room in Olympus Barracks. But it wasn't until we'd been there a little while that I realised that the 250 of us that were selected that year had been selected from 2,500 applicants across the nation. And that sort of hit me then. I thought, wow, how could they get it so badly wrong? They got me. But going through basic training, going through all those experiences, getting leave, getting off camp, going home to school, proudly you wearing your uniform. It's the only way you get into a pub and get a beer, just wear your uniform. Not that we were underage drinkers, were we? No. But going through all of that, there are a couple of things that stand out, and there are times when I'm asked to speak at various places and speak on leadership, and my mind always goes back to those early days as a fresh-faced noddy who was learning how to use a razor. And why, I don't know, because there was nothing growing on my chin. There were a couple of things that have always stood out. And they were simple little lessons that were taught by cadet NCOs and reinforced by the staff. Simple little things like never ask anyone to do anything you're not prepared to do yourself. Set a high standard by all means, but demonstrate it to a standard higher than which you demand of others. And put your troops first. Always the troops first. And it's that last one that came home to me quite in a strange sort of way when I was officer commanding the Sultan Special Force Electrical Mechanical Engineer unit in a base up in the top of the mountains just off the Yemen border. And I had a unit that was comprised mainly of Indian soldiers. We would go out to India quite frequently and recruit and bring them back. And with this particular day we decided to put on a dinner, so we got down into the workshops and set the whole place out like a dining room. And my Indian troops are damn good cooks, particularly if you liked Indian. And we set up this dinner and we had all the officers come in and warrant officers from the other squadrons. Two of those officers were Kiwis, Major Keith Rawlings, and the other one was Major Alistair Mackenzie, then second in command of the Sultan Special Force. And we had the dinner or the meal all laid out, and most of the officers were standing off to one side having a beer and just talking. And my one came over to me, Mr. Pillai, and he said, "Oh, sir, you must go and eat." And I said, "Yeah, no problems, Mr. Pillai, put the troops through." And he went away and we kept talking, and I noticed there was nothing happening. And I looked and he came over again. He said, "Sir, you must eat." And I said, "Yeah, Mr. Peel, I put the troops through, troops first." And in my head, I'm thinking of that queue outside the mess with cadets first, cadet lance corporals, cadet sergeants, cadet staff sergeants, cadet sergeant majors, cadet RSM, and then the staff behind that. Because that's the way it always been in my head. And he said to me, "No, sir." He said, "No, sir, you must eat. Troops cannot eat until the officers have eaten." And I said, "Well, Mr. Pillai," I said, "in the New Zealand Army, that's how we do it. Troops first, NCOs in rank, next, officers last, and I'm the last to eat." And he was just taught. He could not handle that. The Indian Army was clearly quite different. And so too, by the way, was the Brits. In the end, we had a stalemate. And in the end, I had to go over to him and say, "Listen, I will take one meal and I will put it on that table, and you put the troops through. If one soldier doesn't have a meal, he will take that meal." And the other officers who were with me all did the same thing. And only then would my Indian warrant officer put the troops through. And it's sort of one of those moments in time where you look back on your training, your upbringing, the culture, the ethos, the things that you were taught that were ingrained into you at such an early stage as being a 16-year-old cadet, what leadership was and what the values of the New Zealand Defence Force and New Zealand Army, and in particular the Regular Force Cadet School, were and how important they were. We set a new tone in the unit from that day on, and people didn't question it. And in fact, that became the standard practice in the regiment after that day. And I'm very pleased that we shifted some people's thinking, even the Australians in our midst. But there's a lot that I have to be grateful for from being a regular force cadet. Many years later, after I'd left the New Zealand Army and left the Sultan Special Force, come home in 1990. I did 5 years out there and became a Member of Parliament. It really saddened me that we had a whole lot of bad publicity hit the media about people and the rough time that they had had in cadets. Now, we were no saints. Cadet school was probably very much like many boarding schools around the rest of the country. And life could be tough. But it did sadden me that we had that inquiry, and it saddened me that I found myself the only defender in Parliament of the military and of the Regular Force Cadet School at that time. I just thank Justice Morris, I think it was, who ran that inquiry, Bob, if I remember correctly, and those people who did go forward and make submissions. Because the fact of the matter is, the school was tough. It was meant to be. Regular Force Cadet School was established on the back of what had happened in the Second World War and the clear identification that we lacked professional warrant officers and senior NCOs. Some people of the day made a big, bold decision to set up the school and from it to produce the Army's future leaders, future warrant officers, and a limited number of its officers. And that's exactly what it did. They did that because of the casualties that we had suffered in the Second World War and the fact that they really realised that we needed to be more professional. And so the Regular Force Cadet School was born. I think it did a superb job. It saddens me to this day that it was disestablished and it no longer exists. But I take heart that in every day as a Minister of Defence I bump into clubbies still in uniform today, and they are top performing warrant officers and officers, exactly as you and I would expect them to be. I'm pretty damn privileged and very, very lucky to have what I consider to be the best job in the world. I'm not just Minister of Defence, I'm Minister of Veterans as well. I get to blend for the first time, got both these portfolios held by one person who actually has served, who actually does love the military, who isn't doing the job just because it's the only job that they'd give him, who was never a member of a peacenik foundation, like some others I can remember in the past. And I get the opportunity to try and put right some of the things that I believe were not dealt with properly. I know that I've probably been the biggest critic of Defence Force and military spending and projects over the last 20 years in Parliament, and I know I've really annoyed some people. I know I've created some enemies out there. If you're out there listening, Maury Dodson. You know, but at the end of the day, I believe some things that were happening were wrong. I could never accept their decision to disestablish, remove from the statutes, the position of Warrant Officer Second Class. It was just... And I made a few phone calls to people whose judgment and whose careers and records I respect. And I asked them to tell me, am I mad? You know, so people like Rusty Taylor and Tiny Hill. And these days I got Bob I can talk to anytime I like, and a few others. But they confirmed I wasn't mad, it wasn't wrong. And I stopped that being removed from the statutes. I didn't stop them not using the rank. They did that for a time, but you know, posting cycles are posting cycles, and I'm subject to that right now. People come and people go. They ruffle up the water, and when they pull their hand out, the water goes smooth again, and the only difference is they're not there. And so the rank of Warrant Officer Second Class Sergeant Major was reintroduced, and I'm proud to see it worn on people's sleeves again today. But you know, there's a lot of things that